Let us now check to see if what we've done actually accomplishes, well, what we wanted to accomplish. Back in that last module, I showed you this little trick here inside of VMware Workstation to get a copy of VMware Workstation to boot to a USB device. Your hypervisor may be slightly different if you're using VirtualBox or Hyper-V, but I want to show you here that I've just taken the exact same USB stick that we used back in that immediately previous module. No changes at all from the creation of that original USB stick. I'm taking that exact same USB device here and I'm going to boot to it so that we can get access to Windows PE and install the WIM file that we just configured. This will then boot this machine over to Windows PE, so we can just take a look again at the steps we will go through in transferring this WIM file and its contents to an awaiting piece of hardware. One reason why I'm going through this task in this way, using the same USB stick, is because I want to show you some of the power here of WinPE that you might not be aware of. One of the great things about Windows PE is that when you do set it up, it does provide enough of a networking stack to allow you to then attach to remote files on other file servers around in your environment. And the copy of Windows that we're working with here is, I think, like a little more than 4 gigs in size, which is a bit larger than the FAT32 formatted USB stick that we've been using here up until this point. So I am here as part of this demonstration going to show you just one kind of wacky way, but actually really cool way, in which you can remotely access your WIM files and installing them onto these awaiting Hyper-V servers. Let us start this process here by taking a look at the command prompt. Again, this is kind of tiny here, but it's difficult to size it because of how WinPE limits the screen visibility here. As before, we need to prepare the disk, and this is a task that we did back in that last module to create the necessary partitions that will be used by the installer for dividing out the recovery partition, dividing out the system and boot partitions, and so on. So let's start this process again by running diskpart and going through the exact same series of commands. We will take a look at the disks here. Again, those disks are, if I type them correctly, disk 0 and disk 1, with the disk 0 here being the 256 gig local partition, the local disk that exists there on this virtual machine. I will choose select disk 0 and then clean that disk. I will convert that disk to GPT format so I can create a partition of EFI partition of size equal to 100. I'm making this EFT partition here because I'm using EFT as opposed to BIOS for how I get this thing bootstrapped into existence. Or if I type it here correctly, not EFT, but EFI right here. Make sure I type that in correctly. So I've created that EFI partition there of size 100. I need to format it here. Format quick, FS equals FAT32, label equals system. So that will be my system partition here. I will assign it the letter S there. I will also create a partition, an MSR partition here of size equal to 128. And also, if I can spell partition correctly here, this is very difficult to do and talk at the same time. So there, I'll create that partition there of size 128, and then also create a third partition here, a primary partition, where all the OS files will be located. So there's my primary partition. Let me format that primary partition here. Quick fs equals ntfs, label equals server. So this is not a nano server. This will be a regular server core version of the server. And then assign it the letter equal to n. Just like before, I'm using the letter n here just to keep things a little bit easier. If we take a look then at the volumes, we should see that we do have the necessary partitions now separated out so that we can install this copy of Microsoft Windows. Here's the cool part though. Now that we're done with working with the disk here, what we really want to do is remotely reach out to my file server, which in this case happens to be my Windows 10 My Desktop computer, and I want to grab that WIM from over the network and install it here onto this machine. In order to do that, though, I've got to be able to set up the networking on this computer, because right now I've got some automatic private address that's been automatically assigned here onto this computer. There is no DHCP in this network. So let's use a legacy command prompt tool, the netsh tool here, to configure that interface to allow us to connect out to the other machines in this network. I'll use netsh interface IP set address name equals Ethernet 0. This is the equal to the name right here, the Ethernet adapter that I'm working with. Then the address I need is 192.168.3.101 for my network here with a 24-bit subnet mask and a default gateway here of 3.2. Obviously, your networking will be a little bit different here depending on what your configuration is, but this is the way that we can go about now setting up the interface here so we can attach then to the outside world. Let me see then if I can ping my desktop, which I happen to know is 192.168.3.100. Yep, I do get a successful response there from my desktop where I've got those files then located. If you end up having any issues here, you might want to take a look at your firewalls just to see if those firewalls may be getting in the way of a ping connection from this Hyper-V host or proto Hyper-V host over to your copy of your desktop. Let us now then do net use, so the Z drive, 192.168.3.100 to the C drive, and I will log in as company G Shields, or effectively myself. There, I now can access the content in that remote location. And if I take a look at Z right here, we will be able to see then the contents that exist there. There's that WS 2016 folder, as well as the Hyper-V folder that we created and customized. There in Hyper-V is the WIM file that we want to address here on this computer. We now have a couple of commands that we need to accomplish to get that WIM file then installed here onto this local machine. Let me go back to the X drive here and run the dism command. Again, I'm not using the PowerShell version of this command because right here in Windows PE, with this version of Windows PE, we don't have access to Windows PowerShell. So the command we're looking for here is dism apply image file z:\/ Hyper-V and then install.wim. Again, the index equals to 1 because we got rid of all the other indices earlier. And the apply directory here being, just like before, the N drive, where we're going to store those OS files. If I've done everything correctly here, this will now reach out over the network to grab our customized WIM file and suck it down here onto this local machine, unpacking all the files and preparing this copy of Windows Server 2016 to be not only a server, but a patched, updated, and also Hyper-V enabled server right here locally. While we're waiting for this process to complete, I mentioned in the introduction that there are all kinds of tools out there that Microsoft provides, and even some third parties provide, that can assist with automating some of these, as you can see here, command line steps. Windows Deployment Services, the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, even System Center Configuration Manager really use pretty much what we're looking at here in order to deploy out these operating system images over the network. But I want to show you this way because it really is down at the lowest level here using the basic command lines to accomplish the tasks that we need. Once you understand how to do this in this way, it makes all of those other technologies just that much easier to work with. Again, Windows Deployment Services, MDT, and SCCM, because with this information, you really understand exactly what are going on underneath the covers. Once complete, we have two more steps in this process. One is to actually copy over the boot files into the appropriate location and then to reboot the computer. Let us do that here with bcd boot and then n:\Windows, which is the copy of Windows where we want to get those boot files. And we want to copy them onto the S drive so they're available in that boot partition or that system partition available for this machine to boot on towards. So that actually doesn't take that long because the boot files are relatively small. Let me then do wp-util and then reboot to reboot this computer. This is the part where things get really, really cool because this machine is now going to reboot. And once rebooted, go through all the usual steps like what you might think happened under the covers as we were going through that next finish installation way back in the first or second module here in this course. So we are really digging very deeply into the direct install of Microsoft Windows and how everything works that would otherwise be wrapped by that whole graphical user interface.